Hello, and welcome to episode number 2 of Bath Bomb and a Beer, the show where I get drunk in a bathtub and ramble on and on about whatever's running through my head. Now, if you missed episode 1, it was essentially an introduction, but just to sum it up, the whole idea here is a couple of times a week I'll fill up my bathtub with hot water, throw in a bath bomb, and I'll just enjoy the funny colors of the water and the pleasant scent, as well as a couple of these, and I'll just let the thoughts of the world wander through my mind. And at some point, I started to think that it wouldn't be a half bad idea to record my late night drunken bath bomb thoughts and maybe throw them out there to the world and see what kind of input I get. Um, the channel doesn't focus on anything specific. I mentioned in the last video that essentially I'm a car guy, but I don't want the channel to just be specifically automotive related. There's too many political channels. So this is essentially just an all-around whatever I'm thinking about. Think of it like a video, audio journal of whatever I happen to be thinking about that day. I think that's pretty well-rounded. um, if you're new to this channel, don't worry about it. So am I. I'm just starting to get the wheels turning, so to speak. And so there's really no structure yet as to what I intend to talk about in every video. And despite that I did just say I don't want it to be an automotive channel, one thing I was thinking about today is the progression of technology that we see in cars. Um, in video number 1, I referred to myself as having been a mechanic. That wasn't entirely accurate. I should correct that. I've worked with cars for about 11 years. I've worked for 2 companies that provided auto service. I've never been a full service mechanic. I was more of a lube technician than anything. I spent a couple of years as a shop manager for a large retailer. But I never went through any kind of formal ASE training or anything to that effect. But on the side, on my own time, I've done a lot of work on my own vehicle, helping friends with theirs, and I've learned a lot along the way. So it's me referring to myself as a car guy is more of an enthusiasm reference than any base of knowledge. But I've always been very old fashioned. I like simplicity. I don't like when things are complex, complicated. When you start to add too many things into the mix. And over the years that I worked in the auto industry, I started to notice that vehicles rapidly are getting more and more complex. We're cramming more technology into them. And on some levels, that can be a good thing. Sometimes the technology that we add benefits us as drivers. It can benefit the vehicles in terms of their longevity. But I'm starting to notice that a lot of that technology, and this is just my opinion, has kind of gone off the rails in a way that we're starting to do things that aren't necessary. In some cases, things that can be harmful. And I'll give you a good example. Being old fashioned, I've always preferred older vehicles. I've had 2 or 3 cars from the 80s, a couple from the 90s, and a couple from the early 2000s. The newest vehicle I personally have ever owned is 2002. My current daily driver is from 87. And I found it to be my personal preference to drive and maintain an older vehicle because of their simplicity. That kind of mechanical simplicity that we had that long ago, um, it basically meant that there were fewer things to go wrong with the vehicle. Have you ever heard somebody say that older cars lasted longer? That's not always true. But one thing that did help with the longevity of older vehicles was that they were mechanically simple. They were largely operated by springs, cables, physically moving parts. And when you have that kind of a mechanical system, as long as parts are moving, parts are working. It's that easy. But in the mid 90s, there was a shift towards a lot of electronics being added in. And now, 25 years after that, uh, we're seeing things like backup cameras, pedestrian alarms, lane departure warnings. I mean, the cars can drive themselves now. We're literally living in a world where they drive themselves. They can park themselves. There are vehicles on the market today. You can get out of the car, press a button on a key fob, and the car will go park itself. It's a cool idea, but is it necessary? I don't think so. And the reason I don't like that kind of complexity, there are 2 of them. One is that people come to rely on that. If you're driving down a highway and you need an audible warning to tell you that you've drifted out of your lane, you shouldn't be driving. If you need a pedestrian alarm to tell you that somebody has just walked in front of your vehicle and warn you not to hit them, you should have seen that pedestrian. Situational awareness goes hand in hand with operating a vehicle. So some of those technologies, yes, they're helpful. Yes, they can save lives, but my fear is people becoming dependent on that kind of technology. Backup cameras. I see people today that put their car in reverse and they look at a screen and nobody takes the initiative to just look behind them, look out your back window. And that kind of reliance on technology, I think, kind of spans a lot of aspect of our lives. I think there's too much automation, too much reliance on technology. We're living in a world also where people can't stand to be away from their cell phones for more than a couple of minutes. It becomes a second-hand nature, a knee-jerk reaction to reach into your pocket and grab the phone, even if you don't need to use it. I'm guilty of that as much as the next person. But 20 years ago, that wasn't really an issue. It didn't happen. Yeah, we had cell phones, but they were a utility. They were a tool more than a daily reliance. And so over the years, I've started to notice the increase of technology in vehicles because I've spent so much time working with them. And I became increasingly frustrated with the amount of electronics and reliance on technology that we're just cramming into cars these days. The second issue that I referred to is not only the dependence on that kind of technology, but how reliable is it? When you have a vehicle that's loaded with computers that monitor every single function of the car, every single system in the vehicle, it can be helpful. The thought behind it is genuine, but the car's complete existence at that point relies on the functionality of electronic computers. And the problem with computers is they don't last. Who here is still driving or using a computer from the 90s? Well, nobody, because they advance so quickly that a couple of years after you buy a computer, it's obsolete. It's 2 years old. It's last year's model, if not older than that. And you have to continually update it. And I get that cars and home computers are two different worlds, but the idea remains the same, that the more we advance in technology, the faster that advancement continues to happen and the more obsolete technology becomes, the more quickly it becomes obsolete. And that, I think, puts an expiration date on your vehicle. The vehicle that is bought in 2020 could be completely obsolete in 5 years. It could be obsolete the day the warranty expires on it. Granted, in my vehicle from 33 years ago, it is the definition of obsolete. It's a giant square-bodied sedan from the 80s. But the mechanical simplicity behind it and the longevity that was engineered into it ensured that 33 years later, I can still drive it anywhere I want and it works fine. It doesn't rely on computers like modern cars do. It has one, but it's not the lifeblood of the vehicle. It handles some basic functions. So my thoughts on automotive technology advancing the way that it has kind of transcended into my thoughts on our reliance on that kind of technology in daily life. And I try to stay as, I don't want to say technology free, but I try to keep my own life as simplistic as I can. I don't like reliance on that kind of technology. It's not that I feel like it makes life too easy. I'm having a hard time thinking of a way to word this, but I like just keeping things basic. I brew coffee with manual methods like a French press or a pour over. I don't need fancy machinery to brew coffee in the morning. I have a computer and I still use floppy disks in it. It still runs on, it has Windows, but I still use command line functions in it because I just like the basic simplicity of that kind of technology. And it works. There's nothing wrong with it. So the second question that comes to mind is, how far should technology go? And again, that's a universe's worth of a question. That's a huge question. But a friend of mine, I can remember having said years ago, I can quote a friend of mine who had said that in his personal opinion, the Industrial Revolution should have never happened because the Industrial Revolution was the moment that we started developing technology that we would become dependent on. And once we became dependent on that technology, it would continue to advance to a point where we almost couldn't keep up with it. And in a way, he's right. I'm not sure I agree about the Industrial Revolution having been a negative event, but I think that my thoughts on technological advancements is why not get technology to a point where it helps simplify our lives. It helps us do the things that we need to do every day in a better way, but we don't become completely dependent on it. If you remember Y2K, it was the fear that computer systems wouldn't recognize the year 2000 and there would be a global collapse of computer networks. It never happened, but if it had, it would have been almost tragic. There's speculation that that kind of thing could happen in the future, and the problem, I think 2037 is the year that they think there's going to be another instance of that kind of mathematical failure of computers. But think about how much more we're going to be depending on computers in 2037 than we were in 2000. You're talking about 37 years of difference. That's the same time span as that which had occurred between 2000 and 1963, to put it into perspective. So, have we gotten ourselves to a point where we rely so heavily on technology that if it fails, we're screwed? Or are we still at a point where we're using technology to allow ourselves to simplify our lives for the better without totally depending on it? It depends on your own personal thoughts. And again, these are my thoughts. The whole point of these bath bomb and a beer videos is me running thoughts through my head and then just blasting them out there to the world. And those are my thoughts on technology. I personally don't care for it. I believe in keeping things simplified. So those are my thoughts for today. That's kind of what I've been mulling through my head lately. In the last video, I also did mention that if anybody has suggestions for different beers you want me to try and do a mini review on, I'd be happy to do that. In the last video, I was drinking Miller Genuine Draft, which for the past couple of months has become a real favorite of mine. I like the Genuine Draft a lot. I did make a brief reference to Miller High Life, and I had mentioned that despite it having a slightly metallic flavor, it's a really, really good beer for the price. And what you know it, High Life is the flavor of the day for video number 2. I actually really like the High Life. Anywhere you go, the price on it is almost unbeatable for what you get. And it's really, really not bad. It does have a little bit of a metal flavor to it, but you don't really notice it unless you're looking for it. So today's bath bomb of the night beer is Miller High Life. Last night was Genuine Draft, and who knows what we'll choose next time. Anyway, any thoughts on my... any of your thoughts on my thoughts are welcome. And video number 3, we'll see if that happens tomorrow night, next couple of nights, a week from now, a month from now. It just depends on whenever I happen to throw in a bath bomb, grab a 6-pack, and just let my noodle do its thing. So, this will conclude episode number 2 of Bath Bomb and a Beer. Stick around for episode number 3, and until then, have a great night.